Behind the polished windows of Louis Vuitton, Dior, Tiffany Company, and more than 70 other luxury houses stands one family and one unresolved question. Bernard Arnault built LVMH into a global empire worth hundreds of billions of dollars, but his greatest challenge is no longer acquiring another legendary brand. It is deciding what happens when he is no longer there to control the empire himself. Once every month, 5 adult children enter a private dining room inside the Paris headquarters of LVMH. Their father is already waiting. The meeting lasts precisely 90 minutes. Bernard opens an agenda prepared on his iPad and moves through the subjects one by one. The performance of a luxury house, the judgment of a senior manager, a product that may have failed, a market that may be changing, or a decision capable of affecting billions in revenue. Then he turns to Delphine, Antoine, Alexandre, Frédéric, and Jean and asks what they think. The meeting is intimate because they are his children, but it is also intimidating because the man questioning them is not simply their father. Bernard Arnault is their employer, teacher, largest shareholder, and final judge. Journalists have portrayed these lunches as private auditions for succession. Bernard rejects reports of a family war and insists that his children cooperate, make their own decisions, and remain close. Yet one fact keeps the speculation alive. He has never publicly revealed who will replace him. All 5 children now hold important responsibilities within the Arnault business world, but equal opportunity cannot create 5 chief executives. One day, someone may have to make the final decision for an empire containing Louis Vuitton, Christian Dior, Tiffany Company, Bulgari, Fendi, Loewe, Celine, Tag Heuer, Sephora, Moët and Chandon, Hennessy, and dozens of other celebrated houses. But the Arnault children will not simply inherit famous brands and an enormous fortune. They will inherit every triumph, every controversy, and every consequence attached to their father's name. They will inherit a financial machine that transforms handbags, champagne, jewelry, craftsmanship, and history into extraordinary wealth. They will inherit the cultural influence that allowed their family to help rebuild Notre Dame and create one of Paris's most remarkable art foundations. They will also inherit the memory of workers displaced during Bernard's rise, the criticism of activists who challenged his power, and the surveillance scandal that eventually brought him into a Paris courtroom. Above all, they will inherit the responsibility of preserving a family while deciding who controls the empire. To understand what Bernard may be measuring during those 90-minute meetings, however, we must first leave the dining room. We must travel back to a time before LVMH, before Dior, before the private jets, art collections, champagne houses, and succession speculation. Bernard Arnault did not begin his life inside luxury. He was trained as an engineer and entered a construction company built by his father. He did not design a dress, stitch a handbag, make a watch, or create most of the brands he would eventually control. His rare ability was recognizing what possessed lasting value, removing whatever threatened it, and keeping ultimate authority at the center. Bernard would apply that method to failing companies, luxury houses, competitors, and eventually his own family, giving each child independence, responsibility, and opportunity while reserving the final decision for himself. He spent 40 years learning how to take control of vulnerable empires. But his last challenge may be the one transaction no amount of money can complete: surrendering control of his own. Before we can understand how that empire may be divided, we must understand how it was built. And that story begins not in a Paris boutique, but inside a traditional industrial family in Roubaix, France, long before Bernard Arnault became the undisputed king of luxury. Before the empire, there was a family. Bernard Jean-Étienne Arnault was born on March 5, 1949, in Roubaix, near France's border with Belgium. Northern France during his childhood was a region of textile mills, smokestacks, factories, and construction, not the polished universe he would later rule. His father, Jean Arnault, was an engineer who managed Ferret-Savinol, the civil engineering company founded by Bernard's maternal grandfather. The family possessed wealth, but it was practical industrial wealth, built through contracts, property, concrete, and calculations. Bernard's mother, Marie-Joseph Savinol, introduced another influence into the household. She loved classical music and admired Christian Dior, whose post-war designs had restored fantasy and elegance to French fashion. Bernard grew up between 2 different ideas of value. From his father, he learned to measure assets and control expenses. From his mother, he learned that beauty, reputation, and a famous name could possess a value far beyond the materials used to create a product. He studied piano and became a capable player, but being capable did not satisfy him. Bernard later acknowledged that he liked being number one. At the piano, he understood that he would never become the exceptional professional he wanted to be, so he redirected that ambition toward a field where he believed he could dominate. In 1969, he entered École Polytechnique, one of France's most selective institutions, where engineering and mathematics sharpened his instinct for systems. After graduating in 1971, he joined Ferret Savinol. He married Indy Waverin in 1973, before Dior, LVMH, and the immense fortune that would later surround their name. Their daughter, Delphine, was born in 1975, followed by Antoine in 1977. The early Arnault household was prosperous, but was not yet a global dynasty. Bernard was a young husband and father working inside a company associated with buildings rather than fashion. The safe path would have been to preserve the business, wait for his father to retire, and continue what earlier generations had built. Bernard chose the opposite. He examined the company and decided traditional construction offered less potential than real estate. In 1974, he persuaded his father to sell the industrial construction division and focus on property development, particularly holiday accommodations. It was not merely a business decision. It revealed how Bernard treated inheritance. He did not believe preserving every part of the past was a virtue. If one asset could be sold to finance a more valuable future, he was prepared to let it go. By 1977, Bernard was chief executive. In 1978, at only 29, he succeeded his father as chairman. Delphine and Antoine therefore entered childhood beside a father who was already rewriting what the family would become. When François Mitterrand and France's Socialist Party came to power in 1981, Bernard feared that nationalization, taxation, and economic change could threaten the family's interests. He moved Anne and the children to the United States, where he spent approximately 3 years expanding the property business. A famous story claims he asked a New York taxi driver whether he knew the president of France. The driver allegedly did not, but he knew Christian Dior. The story may have become smoother through retelling, but its lesson was powerful. Political authority could vanish at a national border. A great brand could cross an ocean and remain recognizable. Bernard returned to France searching for entry into that world. Delphine and Antoine returned with him, young enough to witness what happened next, but old enough for the family's transformation to become part of their lives. Christian Dior inside the wreckage. In 1984, Bernard found his opportunity inside Boussac St. Frères, a once powerful French textile conglomerate collapsing beneath debt, failing factories, and years of unsuccessful intervention. Boussac had once employed tens of thousands of people, but by the time Bernard approached it, the company had become an industrial and political crisis. Factories were losing money. Communities depended upon jobs that could disappear. The French government needed a buyer willing to accept responsibility for a business most investors considered impossible to save. Bernard saw the liabilities, but he also saw Christian Dior. Buried inside Boussac's wreckage was the name his mother had admired and Americans recognized. With family capital and financing organized through Antoine Bernheim of Lazard Frères, Bernard assembled control over assets far larger than anything he had previously managed. His proposal was presented as a rescue, but his definition of rescue would soon make him one of France's most controversial businessmen. Bernard did not intend to preserve every factory, division, and job inside Boussac. He intended to identify what could create future value and dispose of what could not. Assets were sold. Facilities closed. Thousands of workers lost their jobs. Critics accused him of abandoning assurances made during the acquisition process. For the communities that depended upon Boussac, Dior's revival could not erase the human cost. For Bernard, continuing to fund collapsing operations would eventually destroy the valuable parts as well. He retained Christian Dior and Le Bon Marché, while much of the old conglomerate disappeared. This was the moment his public image hardened. He was no longer merely the intelligent son of an industrial family. He became a corporate operator willing to cut through history, employment, and institutional sentiment to reach the asset he wanted. The phrase later attached to him, the wolf in cashmere, captured the contradiction: calm, restrained, and perfectly dressed, yet capable of dismantling companies that had existed for generations. At home, Delphine and Antoine were watching their father's name become associated with both resurrection and destruction. Their experience of Bernard could never be separated from this period. He was creating extraordinary security and opportunity for the family, but doing so through decisions that brought public anger and intense scrutiny. He did not simply take Dior out of Boussac and leave behind an empty trademark. He invested in the house, strengthened its products and boutiques, expanded its international distribution, and treated its heritage as the foundation of a modern business. Dior was not allowed to survive by repeating memories of its founder. It had to generate new desire. Designers required freedom to create, but the companies surrounding them would be measured with unforgiving discipline. Bernard discovered how to protect the appearance of magic while controlling the machinery behind it. That principle would later define LVMH, but it also shaped the environment in which his children were raised. Creativity could be encouraged. Independence could be granted. Results would still be examined. Dior's recovery gave Bernard profit, credibility, and a platform from which to pursue something larger. One fashion house could not satisfy him. He wanted a structure containing several great names, each preserving its identity while benefiting from one source of capital and control. In 1987, Louis Vuitton merged with Moët Hennessy to create LVMH. The alliance was meant to protect French luxury. Instead, conflict among its leaders gave Bernard Arnault the opening that would change his family forever. The battle that changed the Arnault name. Louis Vuitton brought leather craftsmanship, trunks, and a history connected to travel. Moët Hennessy brought champagne, cognac, and brands associated with ceremony and European prestige. Their 1987 merger created LVMH, but the new group was soon divided by a struggle between Henri Racquemire of Louis Vuitton and Alain Chevalier of Moët Hennessy. They disagreed over strategy, authority, and who would control the future of the organization. Bernard entered the conflict as an investor and apparent ally. Racquemire believed Arnault could help defend Louis Vuitton, but Bernard was not committing enormous resources merely to protect another man's position. Backed by financial institutions, he accumulated shares while LVMH's leaders fought each other. The struggle moved through boardrooms, shareholder alliances, court proceedings, and attempts to stop his advance. Each side believed it could use Bernard against the other. Their conflict instead allowed him to become more powerful than both. By 1989, Arnault had emerged as LVMH's leading shareholder. In 1989, he became chairman and chief executive, taking control of a group assembled by other men. He had not founded Louis Vuitton, Moët, Hennessy, or the original merger. His achievement was more revealing. He entered a structure created by others, identified the weakness inside it, and removed the people who believed it belonged to them. At almost the same time, his first marriage was ending. Bernard and Andy Wavrin separated and divorced in 1990, as his corporate victory was becoming secure. Public information does not establish the private causes of their separation, and a responsible script should not invent scenes or assign blame. But the chronology carries emotional weight. Delphine and Antoine experienced their parents' marriage ending during the very period when their father's public identity was being transformed. Bernard was no longer simply the head of a family business. He had become the ruler of a global luxury group, pursued by newspapers, rivals, politicians, and investors. The two older children therefore encountered LVMH not only as an inheritance, but as the force that reorganized the world around their father. It brought privilege, opportunity, and influence, but also scrutiny and expectations they had not chosen. Bernard now had to prove that luxury houses could be combined without making them ordinary. His solution was controlled independence. Each maison would preserve its own designers, workshops, history, and public identity. Behind those separate worlds, LVMH would provide capital, property, distribution, legal strength, marketing, and global reach. Customers would see Louis Vuitton, Dior, Fendi, or Givenchy. Bernard would see a system in which different houses competed while ultimate authority remained centralized. It was the exact tension that would later shape his family. The children could develop different personalities and careers, but the Arnault name, ownership structure, and their father's judgment would keep them connected to one center. During the 1990s, LVMH expanded through fashion, leather goods, perfume, cosmetics, watches, jewelry, wine, spirits, and selective retailing. It acquired or strengthened names including Celine, Loewe, Kenzo, Berluti, DFS, and Sephora. Asia became essential as new wealth created new luxury consumers. In 1999, the LVMH Tower opened in New York, placing a glass monument to French luxury above Manhattan. Bernard's children could now look at an international skyline, and see their family name connected to an empire their father had taken from construction to global culture within less than 2 decades. The machine behind a dream. LVMH's power came from its ability to behave like many independent worlds and one enormous corporation at the same time. A bottle of Dom Perignon, Bulgari necklace, a Louis Vuitton trunk, a Dior gown, and a Tag Heuer watch could speak to different histories and customers, yet all benefited from the group's capital, real estate, technology, legal power, and global distribution. Bernard protected pricing because uncontrolled discounts could turn rarity into ordinary inventory. He invested in flagship boutiques because the environment surrounding a luxury product had to make the customer feel that entering the store meant crossing into another world. He backed designers capable of reviving old houses, but replaced leaders when creative excitement failed to produce results. LVMH was not a passive collection of beautiful brands. It was a system in which every maison had to preserve its identity while proving its value. Acquisitions continued. LVMH gained control of Fendi and purchased Bulgari in 2011, adding one of Italy's greatest jewelry names. Its reach also met resistance. Beginning in 2010, LVMH revealed that it had quietly accumulated a significant position in Hermès. The Hermès family saw the move as a threat to the independence of a house it had controlled for generations. Relatives reorganized their ownership, legal battles followed, and LVMH eventually agreed to distribute most of its stake. It was a rare moment when family unity stopped Bernard Arnault, an outcome with obvious meaning for the dynasty forming inside his home. In 2021, LVMH completed its approximately $15.8 billion purchase of Tiffany Co. after a legal confrontation during the pandemic. The transaction nearly collapsed when LVMH attempted to withdraw and Tiffany sued to enforce the agreement. It ended at a reduced price, and the American jeweler entered the empire. Bernard later placed Alexandre inside Tiffany as an executive, turning one of LVMH's most expensive acquisitions into another test for one of his sons. Birkenstock, incorrectly described in the original transcript as an LVMH acquisition, was backed by L. Catterton, an investment firm associated with LVMH and Group Arnault, but it did not become an LVMH maison. The distinction matters because the real empire is already extraordinary without giving it companies it does not directly own. By 2025, LVMH contained more than 75 prestigious houses, operated more than 6,280 stores, employed over 211,000 people, and generated 80.8 billion euros in annual revenue. Its 6 major business groups gave the company protection unavailable to a single brand competitor. If champagne weakened, fashion, jewelry, or Sephora could provide balance. Fashion and leather goods historically produced the largest profits because the physical cost of a handbag could never explain its price. The difference came from everything constructed around it: history, craftsmanship, scarcity, architecture, celebrity, advertising, and the promise that the product would never become ordinary. Bernard had turned heritage into margin and desire into a global machine. Competitors remained formidable. Kering controlled Gucci, Saint Laurent, and Balenciaga. Richemont possessed Cartier and Van Cleef and Arpels. Hermès became an increasingly powerful rival through discipline and scarcity. Yet no competitor matched LVMH's breadth. Bernard's wealth moved with the group's share price, sometimes changing by billions in a day. But market value was only one measure of power. LVMH influenced employment, art, tourism, fashion, manufacturing, politics, and what consumers across continents consider desirable. Bernard had built a system capable of surviving changing trends. He had not yet proved it could survive without him. The second family and Bernard's attempt to prevent a divide. Bernard met Canadian concert pianist Helene Mercier at a dinner gathering in 1989. Born in Montreal in 1960, Helene had begun piano lessons at 6, trained in Vienna, studied at Juilliard, continued her education in Paris, and established a respected international career. She entered Bernard's world with an identity formed by discipline rather than wealth. A concert pianist prepares privately for thousands of hours, then faces public judgment in a room where every hesitation can be heard. Bernard understood that standard. He had studied piano seriously, but recognized that he would never become the exceptional professional he wanted to be. Helene had achieved the musical excellence he admired. They married in 1991. She became stepmother to Delphine and Antoine, and she and Bernard had 3 sons: Alexandre in 1992, Frédéric in 1994, and Jean in 1998. The family now contained 2 children from Bernard's first marriage and 3 from his second, separated by as much as 23 years. Delphine and Antoine remember the period before LVMH, the move to America, the Boussac controversy, their parents' divorce, and the battle that made their father famous. Alexandre, Frédéric, and Jean were born after Bernard had secured the empire. The older children had watched the dynasty being created. The younger sons entered a world in which it already existed. Bernard apparently understood how easily that difference could divide them. According to later reporting, he arranged for Delphine and Antoine to become godparents to their 3 younger half-brothers, intentionally strengthening the bonds between the 2 groups. It was a significant decision. The eldest children were not positioned only as future rivals to the younger sons. They were given a formal family responsibility toward them. Helene also maintained her own career, rather than becoming merely an accessory to Bernard's public life. In a 2026 interview, after years of avoiding formal media attention, she was still discussing new recordings and international performances. Her continuity as a musician matters to the family story because it meant the younger sons grew up under 2 demanding standards. Their father built companies. Their mother continued preparing for the stage. Both worlds required practice, judgment, and the ability to perform under pressure. Public information does not reveal every detail of Helene's relationship with Delphine and Antoine, and reports of hostility should not be converted into established fact. Photographs and public appearances show members of the blended family together, but images alone cannot prove intimacy. What is documented is that Bernard designed legal and personal links meant to keep all 5 children connected. He created godparent relationships across the 2 marriages. He placed the children inside one corporate system. He eventually divided ownership in a managing family entity equally among them. These choices suggest that Bernard knew the greatest threat to his empire might not come from Hermès, Kering, or Richemont. It could come from fracture within his own family. Yet his solution contained a contradiction. To preserve unity, he connected the children through ownership and responsibility. To prepare a leader, he repeatedly placed them in positions where their performance could be compared. He was building cooperation and competition at the same time. Their father, teacher, employer, and judge. Bernard's relationship with his children appears to be expressed less through public affection than through preparation, access, and responsibility. Reporting describes him drilling them in mathematics when they were young, assigning senior LVMH executives to mentor them as adults, taking them into the world of the brands, and placing them into increasingly difficult roles. He did not immediately hand any child control of the group. They were expected to study, work, observe, and prove themselves within the system. The monthly lunch brings that relationship into one room. Bernard begins with subjects prepared on his iPad, then asks each child for advice about managers, brands, and strategy. A father asking his children what they think can be a sign of respect. A chief executive asking the same questions in front of 4 siblings can also become an examination. Every answer is heard by the others. Every opinion reveals confidence, caution, or judgment. The meeting creates closeness because all 5 children have regular access to their father. It also creates comparison because Bernard controls the agenda and evaluates the responses. He remains the person who can promote them, move them, correct them, or withhold a role everyone believes they are being prepared to inherit. That makes him several people at once: their father, their teacher, their employer, and the judge of their future. His refusal to name a successor may keep all 5 engaged, but it also prevents any one child from knowing whether decades of effort will lead to the final position. The siblings' relationships, therefore, cannot be reduced to open warfare or perfect harmony. They operate brands, build teams, and sometimes depend upon one another's expertise. Bernard publicly emphasized in July 2026 that his children call each other on Sundays, mocking the suggestion that ordinary family communication should be interpreted as plotting. That detail matters because it places them outside the boardroom. Whatever professional comparisons surround them, they remain siblings who communicate when no official meeting is required. Yet family affection does not erase structural tension. Delphine and Antoine possess age, seniority, and memories of the empire's creation. The 3 younger brothers bring a different generational confidence and were raised after LVMH had become dominant. Reporting from Le Monde claimed that in 2021, the 2 older siblings reminded Alexandre and Frédéric that they still lacked deep experience inside the group. If accurate, the exchange reveals something more believable than a melodramatic feud. Older siblings defending the value of time served while younger siblings become impatient to demonstrate what they can do. Bernard has disputed broader claims of jealousy and division, and those allegations must remain attributed rather than narrated as fact. The deeper conflict does not require anyone to hate anyone else. The children can genuinely love one another and still know that their father is comparing their abilities. They can cooperate to protect the family's ownership while privately wanting greater responsibility. They can call each other on Sunday and compete through results on Monday. That tension is more human and more dangerous than a simple family war. 5 children, but not 5 separate resumes. The 5 careers matter because each assignment reveals what Bernard appears to be testing in that child. Delphine, the eldest, was not sent directly to the throne. She studied business, worked at McKinsey, entered fashion through John Galliano, rose through Dior, and spent a decade at Louis Vuitton overseeing product-related activities. In 2023, Bernard placed her in command of Christian Dior Couture. For Delphine, the appointment was more than a promotion. She was being entrusted with the house her father had rescued from Boussac, the brand connected to her grandmother's admiration and the foundation of the family's luxury fortune. It positioned her as the child of continuity, discipline, and institutional memory. Antoine's relationship with Bernard developed through proximity to the family's public power. His experience included Louis Vuitton, Berluti, L'Europeana Communications, environmental initiatives, and Christian Dior SC, the holding company central to Arnault control. His office has reportedly been located only meters from his father's, giving him frequent contact unavailable to siblings managing houses elsewhere. In 2026, he joined LVMH's executive committee. Antoine therefore represents diplomacy, governance, and the defense of the family's image. Alexandre, the eldest child of Bernard and Helene, developed a more visible, celebrity-connected style. At Rimawa, he used collaborations to make an old luggage company culturally current. At Tiffany, he helped create campaigns involving prominent figures and contemporary art. Admirers saw modernization and global connections. Critics questioned whether celebrity spectacle always respected the American jeweler's deeper culture. His move to Mode Hennessy placed him inside a division facing difficult markets, making the assignment a test of recovery rather than publicity. Frédéric followed a path closer to his father's engineering identity. Educated at École Polytechnique, he led Tag Heuer, oversaw LVMH watches, and then became chief executive of L'Europeana. He represents analytical execution, whether disciplined management can protect a house whose appeal depends on quiet craftsmanship rather than obvious branding. Jean, the youngest, studied at Imperial College London and MIT before entering Louis Vuitton's watchmaking division. He has time the others do not, but less experience. His task is to establish technical credibility in a category where serious collectors will not be impressed merely because LVMH owns the brand. These are not 5 unrelated resumes. They are 5 arguments being presented to the same father. Delphine argues that leadership should follow experience and continuity. Antoine argues that it requires governance, diplomacy, and proximity to the center. Alexandre argues that the future belongs to cultural relevance and global networks. Frédéric argues for analytical performance and operational discipline. Jean represents patience, technical expertise, and the possibility that Bernard has not yet seen the youngest child's final form. Each sibling's advancement changes how the others are perceived. When Delphine received Dior, it confirmed the value of experience. When Antoine joined the executive committee, proximity and governance gained weight. When Alexandre and Frédéric joined the board, the younger generation moved closer to the center. No promotion occurs in isolation because all 5 children understand the same thing. Their father may describe the family as united, but he has built only one chair at the top. The monthly lunch now means more than it did at the beginning. It is not simply 5 rich children competing for an inheritance. It is a blended family created across 2 marriages, divided by age and experience, then deliberately connected by their father. Delphine and Antoine witnessed the empire being built. Alexandre, Frédéric, and Jean were born inside it. Bernard made the 2 older children godparents to their younger half-brothers, binding the generations through family responsibility. He gave all 5 access to the business. He assigned them mentors. He placed them in different houses. He asked them for advice. He made them joint owners of the structure designed to preserve family control. But he did not give them certainty. Every month, they enter the room as siblings. Then their father begins asking questions, and they must answer as executives. They may love one another. They may call one another on Sundays. They may sincerely want the family to remain united. But they also know that every promotion, every successful product, every struggling division, and every difficult decision changes the balance among them. That does not make them television characters. It makes them a family living inside a system designed by a man who has always believed competition reveals value. Bernard used controlled independence to build LVMH. He allowed each maison to protect its identity while keeping final power at the center. He appears to have raised his children through the same architecture. Give them different identities. Give them separate territory. Let them develop. Compare the results. Keep control. Name no successor. The system made LVMH extraordinarily powerful. But it also produced contradictions no heir will be able to avoid. Boussac revealed the human cost of Bernard's decisions. The LVMH takeover revealed what happened to founders who underestimated him. Hermès revealed that family unity could stop even his advance. And in November 2024, a courtroom in Paris revealed something darker. Bernard Arnault testified in the trial of Bernard Squarcini, the former head of France's domestic intelligence service, who later became a security consultant for LVMH. The case involved the infiltration of a small publication critical of Arnault, allegations of illegal surveillance, and claims that public resources had been used for private interests. Bernard insisted that he had known nothing about those operations. He reminded the court that he was present as a witness, a simple witness. But the proceedings exposed the machinery that could emerge when someone threatened the empire's image. For the first time in this story, Bernard Arnault's power was no longer being measured by the luxury houses he could acquire. It was being measured by the people his empire could reach. Part 2. The Price of Absolute Control. On November 28, 2024, Bernard Arnault entered a Paris courtroom and took a place he had spent most of his adult life avoiding. Not at the head of the table, not behind the closed doors of a boardroom, but in the witness box, answering questions about decisions made inside the empire he controlled. For decades, Arnault had built LVMH by studying weakness before anyone else could see it, moving before rivals understood the danger, and keeping the decisive pieces close enough to command. But this room followed a different logic. The judge controlled the questions. The lawyers controlled the rhythm. And the name at the center of the case was Bernard Squarcini, the former chief of France's domestic intelligence service, who later worked as a security consultant for LVMH. Arnault told the court that he had not known about the alleged illegal surveillance carried out against people preparing to challenge his company. He was appearing as a witness, not as a defendant, and he had not been charged. Yet the scene opened a question far larger than one trial. What happens when an empire becomes so powerful and so determined to protect itself that control no longer ends at the doors of its stores, its offices, or even its family dining room? The men who refused to be impressed. The threat did not begin with a rival billionaire or a hostile takeover. It began with a small, fiercely independent newspaper in northern France called Fakir, and with François Ruffin, a journalist and activist whose power came from being unimpressed by the symbols LVMH had spent billions teaching the world to desire. Ruffin's criticism was rooted in the industrial history that luxury advertising rarely shows. Bernard Arnault's first great corporate conquest, the 1984 purchase of the collapsing Boussac textile group, had given him control of Christian Dior, but it also led to the disposal of most of Boussac's other assets and the loss of thousands of jobs. To Arnault, the operation was the ruthless rescue of the one jewel capable of financing a future empire. To many workers, it became a story about factories, livelihoods, and communities sacrificed while a luxury house survived. Decades later, Ruffin turned that contradiction into the satirical documentary Merci Patron. Thanks, boss. Following a working-class couple who had lost their jobs after a textile factory connected to the wider LVMH world was relocated. The film did not confront Arnault on the terrain where he was strongest. It made him vulnerable through humor. It transformed balance sheets into faces, corporate strategy into domestic anxiety, and France's most powerful luxury magnate into the unseen presence haunting a family's kitchen. Ruffin and the Fakir team also considered disrupting an LVMH shareholder meeting, the annual ritual where executives present performance, shareholders vote, and the machinery of authority appears orderly and legitimate. According to the case examined by the French courts, that possibility drew attention from a security operation linked to Squarcini. An operative infiltrated the activist circle, gathering information about their plans while the documentary was being prepared. This was not the glamorous espionage of fiction. There were no stolen diamonds or secret codes hidden inside champagne labels. The targets were journalists and activists working on a low-budget film. That imbalance is what made the story disturbing. On one side stood people armed with cameras, satire, and public embarrassment. On the other stood connections reaching into the world of professional intelligence. Arnault later testified that he knew nothing about illegal surveillance. But whether or not the patriarch had personally known, the operation exposed what had formed around the empire bearing his authority. A protective system so alert to reputational threats that a tiny newspaper could be treated as a security problem. And that contradiction would not disappear when the film credits rolled. One day, Delphine, Antoine, Alexandre, Frédéric, and Jean would inherit more than brands, ateliers, vineyards, and stores. They would inherit the memory of every worker who saw Boussac differently, every critic who challenged the family's version of success, and every question raised about how far a luxury empire might go to defend the image on which its value depended. 10 million euros and a question money could not close. The legal story moved slowly, as cases involving intelligence networks often do. Squarcini had led France's domestic intelligence service from 2008 until 2012 before entering private security work and becoming a consultant to LVMH. Investigators examined accusations that state resources, privileged contacts, and confidential information had been misused for private purposes, including operations benefiting the luxury group. In December 2021, a Paris judge approved a 10 million euro settlement between LVMH and French prosecutors, closing the criminal investigation into the company's role in the spying affair. The agreement did not constitute an admission of guilt. It also did not charge Bernard Arnault personally. Those distinctions matter because suspicion is not proof, corporate responsibility is not automatically personal criminal responsibility, and a serious story cannot erase the boundary between what a court established and what the public may infer. Yet a settlement can close a prosecution without closing the moral question that created it. 10 million euros was an extraordinary penalty in ordinary life, but inside a group generating tens of billions in annual revenue, it could also look like the price of sealing a dangerous door. The deeper trial continued around the people accused of carrying out or enabling the operations. In November 2024, Arnault appeared as a witness and said he had been unaware of illegal surveillance. Then, on March 7, 2025, the Paris court convicted Squarcini of offenses that included using public resources to benefit private interests and illegally surveilling Ruffin and Fakir. He received a 4-year prison sentence, 2 years of it suspended, and a fine of 200,000 euros. His lawyers said they would appeal. The verdict did not transform Arnault into a convicted participant. It did establish that the affair was not merely a paranoid fantasy invented by activists. The infiltration and surveillance had entered the record of a French courtroom. That difference is the fulcrum of the entire episode. Arnault could truthfully insist that he had not been prosecuted and that he denied knowing about the operation, while critics could truthfully answer that people operating within LVMH security orbit had crossed legal lines. Both statements can exist at once, and together they create a harder question than a simple accusation. How does responsibility work inside an organization built around one man's control when that man says the machinery acted beyond his knowledge? If every triumph strengthens the legend of Bernard Arnault's command, can every failure be dismissed as the work of subordinates he did not see? That is not a verdict. It is the unresolved moral pressure left behind by the verdict. It also became part of the inheritance waiting for his 5 children. The next generation will not only be asked whether it can protect Louis Vuitton, Dior, Tiffany, and the rest from competitors. It will be asked what kind of protection is legitimate, how dissent should be handled, and whether an empire obsessed with controlling its image can tolerate people who refuse to admire it. Squarcini's conviction closed one courtroom chapter. It did not close the argument over the culture of control that made the chapter possible. How desire becomes an empire. To understand why the empire guards its image so fiercely, begin with one object placed beneath perfect light, a handbag. Before it reaches the glass display, leather has been selected, hardware shaped, patterns cut, pieces assembled, quality inspected, packaging prepared, and a story built around the finished object. The price does not represent material alone. It carries craftsmanship, scarcity, architecture, celebrity, store location, history, and the customer's belief that the object grants entry into a world unavailable to everyone else. That belief is not decoration added after production. It is part of the product. Arnault's genius was recognizing that the same machinery could be applied across different forms of desire without making the houses look identical. Fashion and leather goods offered icons such as Louis Vuitton and Dior. Wines and spirits turned vineyards, cellars, and patience into bottles from Moët and Chandon, Dom Perignon, and Hennessy. Perfumes and cosmetics sold an intimate version of the same dream. Watches and jewelry compressed engineering, precious materials, and status into the wrist or the hand through names including Bulgari, Tag Heuer, and Tiffany Co. Selective retailing, led by operations such as Sephora and DFS, controlled the place where other people's products met the customer. Hospitality and other activities extended luxury from something a person owned into a world a person could temporarily inhabit. In 2025, despite a disrupted global economy and uneven demand, LVMH reported roughly €80.8 billion in revenue. Across its network were more than 75 maisons, over 6,000 stores, and more than 200,000 employees. Those numbers matter only if the listener can feel what they mean. Thousands of doors opening each morning, sales advisors learning the rituals of attention, artisans repeating movements measured in millimeters, executives reading demand across continents, and customers from Paris to Shanghai purchasing not merely an object but membership in a mythology. Competitors attack different parts of that system. Hearing fights through fashion houses. Richemont commands watches and jewelry. Hermès remains the rival that proved prestige could resist even Arnault's reach, defending its independence after LVMH quietly accumulated a major stake. The 2021 purchase of Tiffany for about $15.8 billion showed the opposite outcome. When Arnault chose to pursue a prize, even a bitter dispute over the deal could end with another historic name inside the group. And the investment in Birkenstock, made through L. Catterton and the Arnault family's investment interests, not by turning Birkenstock into an LVMH maison, showed that the family could recognize modern luxury in an object once defined by comfort rather than glamour. This is the machine the children are being prepared to inherit, not a pile of brands, but a global system that converts memory, labor, beauty, and controlled access into margin. Delphine must protect the desirability of Dior without freezing it in the past. Antoine must defend the group's public image and institutional relationships. Alexandre must understand a customer culture being rewritten by technology and speed. Frédéric must make disciplined performance-serve houses whose value depends on emotion. Jean must prove that mechanical tradition can still seduce a generation raised on screens. The financial engine is therefore not a pause in the family drama. It is the throne itself, and whoever commands it will also command the contradictions built into every beautiful object it sells. The cathedral, the museum, and the factory floor. Power on this scale rarely remains confined to commerce. It begins to shape what a country preserves, what a city displays, and which version of history receives the most magnificent room. In Western Paris, the Fondation Louis Vuitton rises beside the Bois de Boulogne like a vessel made from wind and glass. Designed by Frank Gehry and opened in 2014, is simultaneously a museum, an architectural spectacle, and a declaration that the Arnault name belongs not only to luxury retail but to the cultural life of France. Inside, visitors encounter major exhibitions and works associated with some of the most celebrated artists of the modern era. Outside, the building itself performs the argument. Private fortune can create a public experience on a scale governments increasingly struggle to finance. Arnault's collection, patronage, and competition with other great French fortunes placed art within the same larger strategy he applied to brands. Identify enduring value, acquire or support it, frame it beautifully, and connect the result to a name powerful enough to survive generations. Then came the fire at Notre Dame Cathedral in April 2019. As flames tore through the roof and the spire collapsed, the Arnault family and LVMH pledged €200 million toward reconstruction. The commitment was vast, visible, and tied the dynasty to a monument far older than any company it owned. It also completed an extraordinary historical circle. The young engineer from Roubaix who had inherited a construction business, then abandoned construction to pursue luxury, returned through wealth to help rebuild one of the most important structures in France. But a 1010 story cannot stop at the beauty of that symmetry. It must leave the cathedral and look back toward the factory floor. The same career that helped preserve Dior, funded a Gehry museum, and contributed to Notre Dame was built through decisions that cost workers their jobs and later drew Ruffin's camera toward the families living with those consequences. Both images belong in the frame. Artisans restoring stone beneath the vaults of Notre Dame, and former textile workers calculating what remained after an industrial world disappeared. Philanthropy does not erase the second image. Criticism does not make the first meaningless. Together, they reveal how modern power operates. A billionaire can preserve collective memory while helping determine whose hardship becomes less visible. He can give the public extraordinary beauty while controlling the private system that produced the fortune. And his children will inherit that cultural responsibility along with its skepticism. They will be expected to fund exhibitions, protect craftsmanship, respond to national emergencies, and represent France abroad. At the same time, every gift will be examined for motive, every museum connected to corporate image, and every celebration of heritage measured against wages, closures, taxes, and influence. This is why the Arnault succession is larger than choosing the next chief executive. The family is preparing to inherit a position somewhere between industrial dynasty, cultural patron, political presence, and national symbol. The next leader will not simply decide which designer runs a fashion house. That person may help decide which buildings are restored, which artists become visible, which traditions survive, and what France believes luxury owes to the society that made it possible. The lock around the dynasty. Bernard Arnault has not publicly named the child who will succeed him at LVMH, but he has worked carefully to ensure that the family will not lose the empire while deciding. The mechanism sits above the famous brands, inside the holding structure through which the Arnault family maintains control. In 2022, Agache was transformed into a partnership limited by shares, a legal architecture designed to protect continuity and make an outside assault far more difficult. At the center of that arrangement is a managing entity in which each of Bernard's 5 children holds an equal 20% interest. Delphine, Antoine, Alexandre, Frédéric, and Jean may carry different titles, command different businesses, and possess different levels of experience, but at this crucial layer, the structure does not crown one above the others. It binds them together. That is an important distinction because ownership succession and leadership succession are not the same problem. Arnault has gone far towards settling the first. The family remains united inside a fortified structure, and control is designed to pass through the bloodline rather than scatter among outsiders. The second remains deliberately open. Who, if anyone, will one day occupy the position from which Bernard has directed the whole? Equal ownership can discourage dispossession, but cannot eliminate ambition. It can force cooperation, but it cannot guarantee affection. It can prevent an outsider from buying the throne, but it cannot decide which sibling is best prepared to sit in it. Reports have repeatedly tried to describe the family as a private contest, searching for signs of jealousy in every appointment and treating every promotion as a round in an undeclared tournament. Bernard has publicly rejected portrayals of a bitter rift. He has said the children run their houses, build their teams, make decisions, and remain in contact with one another, including regular Sunday calls. The family history also contains deliberate bonds. Delphine and Antoine, the 2 children from Arnault's first marriage, were made godparents within the younger generation, strengthening the connection to Alexandre, Frédéric, and Jean. Those choices do not prove that competition has vanished. No serious observer can know the full emotional life of a private family from corporate announcements. But neither should cooperation be dismissed simply because rivalry makes a more exciting headline. The stronger tension is that both can be true. The siblings can care for one another and still understand that only one person can exercise Bernard's present authority. They can cooperate as owners while competing through performance. They can protect the dynasty while disagreeing over what it should become. The lock, therefore, creates an extraordinary future boardroom, 5 heirs who cannot easily escape one another, each carrying 1/5 of the structure meant to defend the whole, and each aware that their father solved the question of possession without answering the question of command. He has prevented the empire from being conquered in the way he once conquered vulnerable companies. What he has not prevented is the day his children must negotiate power without him standing at the head of the table. The one acquisition he cannot make. At an age when most executives have already stepped away, Bernard Arnault continues to behave less like a ceremonial patriarch than an active inspector of the world he built. He studies stores, observes presentation, notices products, questions managers, watches competitors, and treats small defects as evidence of larger weakness. His discipline has always mixed analysis with aesthetics. He trained as an engineer but remained attached to music. The piano offered a private language of structure, precision, and interpretation. He plays tennis, maintains a demanding schedule, and continues to place himself inside the operating life of the group rather than above it. The same instinct shaped his parenting. His children were not simply handed prestigious names and told to enjoy them. They were tested, educated, assigned mentors, placed inside companies, and expected to demonstrate judgment under the eye of a father who was also their ultimate employer. Mathematics exercises, business discussions, monthly family lunches, individual roles, Sunday calls, each became part of a long preparation in which affection and evaluation could never be fully separated. That system helped produce 5 credible heirs. It may also explain why naming one is so difficult. A declared successor would change the chemistry immediately. The chosen child would gain authority before taking office. The others would have to redefine their ambitions. Executives outside the family would begin aligning themselves around a future center of power. Markets would judge the decision, employees would read it as a signal, and every success or failure of the chosen heir would be interpreted as a verdict on the father. Arnault has instead preserved uncertainty while extending time. LVMH shareholders approved raising the maximum age for the combined chairman and chief executive role to 85, potentially allowing him to remain in command for years. The company says succession plans exist for different scenarios, but those plans have not been made public. That may be prudent governance. It is also classic Arnault. Options remain open. Rivals receive no clear target. The children continue developing. The final decision stays with him. Yet time is the one counterparty that cannot be outmaneuvered, bought at a discount, or absorbed into a holding company. Every acquisition of Arnault's career depended on a moment when another owner had to let go. Boussac's collapse opened Dior. Conflict inside LVMH opened the path to control. Tiffany's resistance ended in agreement. But the last transfer is his own, and it reverses the role he has played for 40 years. He will not be the buyer waiting for weakness. He will be the owner required to surrender command. Perhaps that is why the succession remains unresolved, not because none of the children is capable, but because choosing one would make the future real. The empire can be locked against outsiders. The family can be trained for responsibility. The brands can be protected by managers, lawyers, artisans, and capital. But no legal structure can preserve Bernard's presence at the table. His final act of control must therefore be an act of release, and it may be the most difficult decision he has ever made. Once a month, the 5 children enter the private room and take their places around Bernard Arnault. For 90 minutes, they discuss the houses, the numbers, the people, the threats, and the future. Each arrives with a different argument for what the empire should become. Delphine carries continuity. Antoine carries the family's public face. Alexandre carries disruption. Frédéric carries disciplined execution. Jean carries the long horizon of a generation still proving itself. Their father listens, questions, measures, and decides. Outside that room stand the things his success cannot separate from itself. Dior rescued from collapse, thousands of jobs lost in the dismantling of Boussac, a journalist watched by men connected to intelligence, a 10 million euro settlement without an admission of guilt, a former spy chief convicted, a cathedral restored, a glass museum rising over Paris, and a luxury machine powerful enough to shape desire across the world. This is the inheritance in full, not merely wealth, but consequence. Then the meeting ends. The children leave and return to the houses they have been trusted to lead. Bernard remains the one person who can see the entire board because he arranged every piece. But one day, the same family will meet without him. The ownership has been secured. The leadership has not. And the true test of the Arnault dynasty will not be whether 5 heirs can preserve a fortune. It will be whether they can preserve a family while deciding who controls an empire. If you value stories where power, history, and family are examined without worship and without easy villains, subscribe to Tilt and Chill. Here, the rarest luxury is not a handbag, a jewel, or a private room. It is the truth about what an empire costs.